Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, and if you've seen the other shows, you'll be expecting this. Namaste and in Lak'ech come from two ancient languages. Namaste comes from the Sanskrit, spoken, it's called Brahmi, and it means the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. In Lak'ech comes from the other side of the world, the Mayan civilization, and it simply means I am another you. Now, here's a couple of ancient civilizations that are offering this wisdom to us. And if we could only take that in and approach life from that perspective with others, wow, what a change we would notice. Don't believe me? Try it for yourself. You'll see the difference. Great. So this week's guest is Perry Knoppert. Also, he's known as Dr. Octopus. Why, you might ask? Well, he's the founder of the Octopus Movement, and I'll explain about that in just a moment. He's also an artist, author of The Time of the Corona, published in December of 2020. He's an entrepreneur. He's an interviewer, podcast host himself. He's a speaker, and you'll love this one. He's a multi-potentialite. Now, this is a word we'll discuss here in a bit as well. So he's the founder of the Octopus Movement, which is a global coalition of non-linear thinkers united by a desire to create positive change in the world. And he says that instead of seeing the ADHD energy that he was labeled with as a kid, he turned it around and found it to be a key to finding greatness in his own life. And so he reinvented himself as a nonlinear thinker because he was able to bounce around and do all kinds of stuff. I can relate to that as a kid, but they didn't have ADHD when I was younger. We were just active, right? So with that, Perry, thanks for being here, man. Great to have you.
Thank you, Zen. And we're already having fun. I like that because just before we start hitting the record button, we were saying, let's have some fun. And since then, we're both laughing already, not even knowing why we're laughing, but we're already having fun. Just the idea that we're going to have fun is already fun.
Oh yeah, it's that anticipation. It just kind
Thank you for being here. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for everything. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you. You know, I am another you, you're another me, and together, you know, it's like I am you and you are we, and we are all together. Cuckoo, cuckoo, right? Remember that one from way back.
Yes.
And but you probably aren't old enough to remember the Wayback Machine with Sherman and Peabody.
Yes, I know them. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I think we have the same age, Zen, more or less.
Wow.
No, I'm teasing you.
I was gonna say you look like you could be my son, and a great one you would be. So, you know, in having fun, part of that is discovering yourself, right? And you obviously discovered that differentiation as a kid when they were, you know, putting the labels on you and saying you're this way or that way, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, I'm just me. Right. So how did you first get into that notion and connect with that inner awareness that it's okay to be you?
That's wow, that's a very difficult one. I remembered one time I was very proud. My father was invited by my teacher, and I don't know which grade. I think I was 8 or something. Mm-hmm. And the teacher said to my father, he said, normally, I can read all these kids. I know what they're thinking of. I know what they're doing. I know what's happening. And you can already guess then. But with your son, I can't. I don't know what's happening in his mind. I can't read him. I can't follow him. Not that's a bad thing. I don't know. And I remember that I was proud of that. Even when I was 8 or 9, I don't remember that well. I have to ask my dad. And my dad was proud as well. And we were both laughing, saying,
it's kind of cool. I can have some fun with that.
Cool job.
Yeah.
But on the other side, one of the first labels I received was dyslexia. which is not really funny when you're at school and everybody is learning how to read and write and you're making stupid mistakes all the time. And I started thinking I was stupid, and I stopped believing that only a few years ago. Before that, before the awareness of having dyslexia is pretty cool, I always tried to hide myself in my writing and reading because I didn't want to make any mistakes. And that's how society works, of course. Making mistakes is not a good thing. And now, when I'm in a live interview and sometimes I type these words, that appear underneath in the screen, and I'm like, oh God, I hope I'm doing a good
Oh,
job
I
here.
spelled that correctly, right?
Oh shit. And then you have all these spelling checks on your computer. Thank God. But now, I say everybody knows I have dyslexia. And if I make a stupid mistake, well, enjoy it, laugh about it. It's fun. You know what I mean anyway. But as a child, my God, that's not what we are being told, that it's okay to make a mistake, that people will understand anyway what you will write. No, it needs to be perfect.
Right.
You write house like that and not any other way. And with dyslexia, you do write it in different ways. Boy, was it difficult. And am I so happy now to embrace my weirdness? I've always been weird, but now I'm fine with it. And yeah, that
So
created
let's
the
talk
octopus movement.
a little bit more about that. Not that I want to dwell on that, because I know that's an excruciating place to go back to. And we all have our childhood things that we go through in the desire to be part of a community, right? Or part of a group like your classmates, right? And that sense of, oh, I'm different, ought to be acknowledged and honored and empowered, as opposed to what happens in the systems, in the educational system especially. And kids can be cruel, brutal in their comments towards others because they don't know any better, first of all, and they're so open and willing to just let the words fly, right? And it's usually what comes out of the programming that they've received from their parents, school, church, community, all of that, and then they don't even realize it, right? They're just repeating stuff because they haven't learned how to, the critical thinking skills to to say, wait a minute, how would I feel if that were me? Right? And that would totally flip that engagement, I'm sure. We don't learn that until later. But as a kid, how did you manage being that? What kinds of things or ways did you find as coping strategies to get through that and be somewhat okay with yourself in being able to explore life and education?
Well, for me, I was on both sides. So I was on the side of being weird, and I was on the side of trying to fit in. And that's impossible. Of course, you cannot be weird and trying to fit in at the same time. It's take a decision: be cool or be weird, fit in or don't fit in. And I noticed that I've always tried to fit in and then be weird while fitting in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very entertaining for the people you're joining with, because you're someone different in that standard group of kids, right?
Right.
But you never do really fit in. It's the same with your family-in-law, right? It's you're married to your spouse, but you're not really a part of the family. You are there, but not really there. And I felt that as well as a child, that I was lost because I wasn't accepted by the weirdos. I wasn't accepted by the cool ones. I couldn't make up my mind. And most important, no one was talking about it. No one was saying anything. It wasn't there for the outside world, but it was there for me. And I was doing things that other kids were not doing. I was a semi-professional photographer when I was 12. I went to weddings and to take pictures when I was 12, 13. I would show up with my camera, and then, the guests and the couple were looking at me like, where's the photographer? Yeah, it's me. And the other one is coming. It's 5 minutes late. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is a child. No worries. I make the most beautiful pictures.
Right.
But I was doing weird stuff. So I started doing a photography course when I was 10 or 11. And I was sitting there between all these housewives, you know, who were doing these evening courses. And my parents, very liberal, they were fine with that. So even when the course was late in the evening and it was bedtime already, I could follow the course anyway.
Hmm.
I was doing strange things. They were not in line. I would call that now very nonlinear, but I've always been very nonlinear and at the same time trying to fit in
Right.
as good as possible because you always want to be seen. You always want to be heard. You always want to be liked. That's right. You
And
want to
yet,
be acknowledged.
like you know, you have to learn to be comfortable being a nonconformist,
Yes.
right? Because conformity just wasn't part of the package that you were willing to entertain. I can relate, you know,
Really, Zen.
yeah, just a little.
Yeah.
Um, you know, when do you ever see anybody sitting on the moon having a conversation, right?
Yeah.
So in that, you know, the willingness that we have, and this kind of reveals a lot about humanity, the willingness that we have to label and categorize and pigeonhole and diminish others as a result. You know, we were having a conversation in a friendship bench earlier today, and the conversation was about identity. And the question on the table was, when did you feel like you weren't able to show up as you?
Well,
Right?
I think when something becomes complicated, we want to simplify because otherwise we can't handle it. And I think diversity is something you cannot simplify because then it's not diversity anymore. And for me, that's a contradiction. So we cannot accept the fact that I'm wearing nail polish and I'm not gay or I'm not into heavy metal. So for a lot of people, this is very difficult. This is very much a conflict. But why? You know, why does it need to have a label, either gay or heavy metal? If I see a woman with nail polish, doesn't mean anything. You know, I could tell by the color of the nail polish what she prefers and what kind of style she has, maybe. But why can't we just accept this? And I think education, and going back to little Perry that was in the classroom and the teacher was having a hard time reading him. I teach at schools now about nonlinear thinking. I go to these kids and talk about this because I feel and I think that everybody is very nonlinear and accepting. When you're a baby, it's fine, it doesn't matter. And then you go to school and you enter all the systems and they're very linear, and it's a very good thing as well because we learn something and we get a diploma and
Mhm.
we evolve and we get somewhere. I'm fine with that. But on the other hand, it destroys something as well. And something
Potentially.
I potentially
Yeah.
and something what I noticed when I was interviewing multi-potentialites all over the world, that there was no issue whatsoever with race, skin color, religion, background, education, politics, nothing at all. It was always a connection between two people resonating with each other in balance, talking about very interesting stuff.
Hmm.
And I thought, why is this possible when I'm Zooming with all people all over the world and it's not an issue? And when we look outside, it is a big issue.
Yep.
What's going wrong there? And for me, it's that diversity and the complexity and the simplifying from everything. That's why we have labels. I'm
You
in
brought,
favor.
speaking of labels, you just brought up one that I think needs a little unpacking.
Multi-potentialites.
Yes,
Can I do it?
absolutely. 30 seconds.
Emily Wapnick is the one who invented the word multi-potentialite. She gave a TED talk about, are you a multi-potentialite? Someone who has multiple focus, multiple passions, multiple interests, who's able to connect the dots very easily and is able to create solutions to complex situations. Someone who's always creative and has so many ideas, and someone who can relate to whoever, wherever, whenever, very easily. And that's a multi-potentialite.
Is that akin
So
to a polymath?
a polymath, more or less the same.
Okay.
And then Emily Wapnick has it from Barbara Scher, who calls them a scanner. Barbara Scher wrote a beautiful book, Refuse to Choose, and all the scanners in the world went nuts because she was the first one to write a book to say, if you're creating a project, don't finish it. So she was the first one ever to advise not to finish, because scanners, multi-potentialites, polymaths, people are doing multiple things and are discovering a lot of different areas. Always get the advice, you need to focus, you need to finish, otherwise you will end up nowhere. A master of none, a jack of all trades, master of none.
Right. Life's not that way, though.
Life is not that way, but the linear world is that way. Education is that way. Society is that way. Government is that way. Big institutions are that way. Big corporations are that way. Startups, not so much. These cool startups are very nonlinear in that perspective. So,
well, and you made a comment, you were actually quoted in Forbes recently. And I think I've got it here, is that, you were being asked about the multi-potentialites and effectiveness in
neurodiverse people, neurodiversity at the company you're working. So employees hiring neurodiverse people. Yeah.
So your comment was basically that industry and business in general don't acknowledge and or plan for these kinds of individuals or invite them, which are ultimately those who can create or co-create the solutions necessary. Another one of my guests wrote a book called The Ambidextrous Organization, and how he frames that, really cool. And how he frames that is that there's two ways organizations develop, companies, corporations: exploitative or explorative.
Yeah.
Right. And so the exploiting side is, I got a product, we're going to go after market share and we're going to push as hard as we can to get it. The explorative side is, what are we going to do next?
Yeah.
Right. Because product curves always end. We're going to take it to the next one. Right. And so what he's saying in this book is that organizations need to have both. Otherwise, they're limited scope and time.
Well, if you want to create and innovate and do something mind-breaking, and if you want to change the world, someone said experts cannot innovate because an expertise is always based on knowledge of the past. And that's so difficult to innovate when it's
like
based
the piled
on
higher and deeper guys, right?
Right. And when you make a list of people that really did something very remarkable in the world, many of them were very nonlinear. Many of them had neurodiversity, either dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, bipolar, meaning their brains were wired differently than standard. And they were in that linear structure called education, and they succeeded and they got their diploma or they went to Harvard, but still there was this energy of excitement that there was something else as well.
Right. Just waiting to be unleashed.
So they had it all. They, with a linear path and a non-linear path, and they were able to bring that together, which I find fascinating. And
now, what about non-local?
What do you mean by that?
So it's said non-local, basically, we think, and that our thinking is resident in the brain only, right? And yet you and I both know that that's not true. That our minds are part of for lack of a better, one mind that is contained by the thoughtmosphere. We'll throw that one in.
The thoughtmosphere, there it is again.
Right.
Love that word.
And so that thoughtmosphere is all the infinite intelligence that we can imagine available, able to be tapped into with a question.
Yeah, but Zen, if you're if you don't recognize that, or talk about this, or at least discuss the possibility, and you stay in your linear education, then you will never go there, because you follow the instructions how to go from A to B to C to D,
Right.
and there is no other way. We
And that's a
know.
belief system. And as we know, those are all BS, right?
Yes.
Now,
And
how do
real
we,
life doesn't work that way, right? And everybody can agree with us that real life isn't about one correct answer, doing it by yourself without making any mistakes. That's how school works, but that's not how real life works. There are always multiple answers. It's always better to work with others and not do everything by yourself.
Mhm.
And how wonderful is it to make mistakes? How wonderful is it to... I lived in China. I made all the cultural mistakes you can imagine in China, all of them. And the beauty in China is that the Chinese will always play the culture card when they're sick and tired of you, because they will always win. It's 600 years of civilization, 6,000 years, I don't know. It's very long, you know,
Right.
and they have their culture, and it's so strong. And then you come as a visitor, you read a book about China. You have no idea. You make all the stupid mistakes you can imagine. But there is, if you leave your ego at home, you can make all the mistakes in the world. They love you anyway. And you learn so much. And it's so much better to be in a good conversation and in good contact with people you have never seen before, and you make all the mistakes. But
Mhm.
they know your heart is at the right spot, and they can feel that you're a nice person, rather than going to a training course for 2 weeks, learn everything there is to know about China, then come to China and think, I'm going to do and play this game by the book. Fuck,
Right.
you're not.
Well, I had a good friend, mentor when I was younger. I was in the aerospace industry, and I had amazing results. I was a production control coordinator in charge of $7 million a month in shipments, over 800 part numbers. And I was 26, and I loved the job. And the reason I was successful is I knew how to be humble. And I would say, hey, it's my first time through this. I feel like an idiot. I don't know what or how to do this. Can you help me out? Right. And that alone seemed to ignite that. Yeah, I'll help you, because you just admitted that you need help and you asked for it. And so I'm kind of compelled to give it.
Yeah.
Well, this, the mentor that I had, I eventually brought him in as a consultant for interpersonal skills workshops and development for the company. And I had that much of an effect. Well, he said later that in the 80s, American corporations would go abroad, not study anything about the local cultures that they were going into, and then expect those cultures to adhere to the American way of life and living, and then wondered why 80% of them failed.
Yeah, and celebrate the fact that the Americans are coming. Yoo-hoo.
Right,
Coca-Cola's here.
right, right.
Yeah.
And so those were, and then of course there was, what was his name? John Perkins, who did the bidding for the IMF, and would set up the removal of resources from countries that couldn't pay their debt.
Yeah.
And so, and his, what was it, Anatomy or Confessions of a Economic Hitman, I think was the book that he wrote. And so he just laid this out. This was his job.
Yeah.
Was just go out and set these things up, where you would think that kind of activity would just weigh so heavily on the person over time that it would just be excruciating. Even though the money was great and things like that, it was an empty, unfulfilling kind of life. And this is what he admitted to.
Yeah.
So how,
Do you think he was a multi-potentialite?
I'm sure he had to have been in order to be able to do the job that he did, because of the demands of being able to flip on a dime.
Always. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, to always just be able to respond to the moment, not react, right? Because the reaction that we have is often, that's where our belief
No.
system
Yeah.
shows up.
Yeah. We need to switch that off from time to time.
Yeah,
Don't react immediately or respond. React, but yeah.
I call it hitting the pause button,
Yeah.
and just take a breath and relax and say, wait a minute, I'm here, they're here. We're not here to aggress toward each other. We're
No.
here to learn how to work together and solve this challenge, whatever it may be.
But
And
some people are so well trained in pressing your trauma button so well, then
sure,
it's so difficult to flip the switch when that happens. I've seen Deepak Chopra in an interview, and he years and years ago, and he was explaining that he would go to a silent place even within a conversation, in between sentences. And I thought it was so fascinating, because my ADHD head is, it's Chinese New Year every second.
right.
It's always fireworks. It never stops. So,
I
but
would offer
training
that there is a pause in between those firings that you finally got in touch with, because you slowed down enough just in a moment to recognize that, oh yeah, that's there. I can make a choice in that place.
and I'm able now to flip the switch. And I wish I know how I'm doing it, because I can teach everyone to do that. Because it's wonderful, because someone is saying something to you, or you're reading something, and immediately your whole system is responding, and your gut feeling and everything. And it's so nice to do flip the switch, and
Yeah.
okay, wait, and then come back. And this is something we should learn at school. This is something we should talk about at schools, in education.
Critical thinking, we have three different aspects of ourselves. We have the participant, the observer, and the will, right? And the will is beyond us. It's just what needs to happen in the moment that we acquiesce to by being observant and asking questions rather than simply participating. And so in that place, one of the things that I've learned to do is monitoring my thinking, right? We've got 70,000 thoughts that go through our heads today, or so we're told. And in those, we still are able to manage them. And it seems like we're told, oh, you can't manage those thoughts. Well, meditation teaches you how to manage those thoughts. It teaches you how to observe them. Then once you become aware of your thinking, and that you're thinking about the thinking, then you can manage the thinking by redirecting those thoughts that you have that aren't congruent with your being. And you recognize those when they come up, because you feel it. It's like, oh, no, that doesn't feel right. Right.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned to do in that really simple process is I just think as soon as I recognize that I'm going down that, I just think I, and at the same time, there's, in that silence, there's this really high pitched sensation that becomes present. And I think the Hindus call that the shabda, the sound current, which is like the combination of all vibrations on the planet, living, and maybe even inanimate. I'm not sure. It's there though. It's evidenced. It's thousands of years old that they've known it was there. So we can all, if I can access it, anybody can. Right? There's just that simple moment of hitting the pause button and allowing that exchange of thinking patterns, kind of like a cognitive scientist, right? That recognizes one pattern happening and is like, oh, redirect.
Yeah.
And then allowing yourself to do that. Really simple process. We can have all kinds of tools. It's implementing them that we have challenges with. How have you found that in your process, how you're able to recognize those moments and implement whatever tools that you have at your disposal to better center yourself or redirect from something that isn't quite so congruent to something that's more congruent?
I think I literally hit the pause button in my life that changed everything. But my God, it's a cliche when I'm saying this. It's
Mhm.
horrible. But a few years ago, I I lost my relationship. I lost my house. I lost everything, and I became
Oh,
home.
you were just playing a country and western tune backwards, right?
Yeah.
Or wanted
Yeah.
to anyway. You played it forward, and that's why you lose everything.
You lose everything, and something happens when you lose everything, and it's fascinating. And I remember standing in the living room of my girlfriend, a new relationship, and I said to her all of a sudden, "Oh, I it's clear to me." And she said, "What's clear to you? What are you talking about?" I said, "I don't know, but it's crystal clear to me at that point." And she said, "But what are you talking about?" I said, I can't explain, but it feels that everything is crystal clear." So
That's one of those non-local moments that I was talking
exactly.
about.
But how did I come there? Maybe I came there because I acknowledged all the shit in my life, that I acknowledged that I was playing a part, playing a role in life with my avatar that wasn't real. Maybe I faced my biggest fear. I have 3 kids. I wasn't able to see my kids. My ex-wife
Hmm.
really thought, "Oh my God, you're a homeless dude, horrible. Don't go to the kids. It's all too difficult." So I faced my biggest fear, and my biggest fear wasn't losing everything. My biggest fear was the kids. And that maybe when you face everything, and maybe for someone it's doing an ayahuasca ceremony or doing an LSD trip. Maybe my LSD trip was losing everything.
Right.
and and standing in front of the desk of the Salvation Army with my bag and my dog, and can I stay here? And no, you can't, because you have a dog. And then I'm thinking, what the hell is happening in my life? A few months ago, I had this huge house in the forest, and now zero. That's what happens. That all of a sudden it was clear, and I knew that everything that would come to me would be clear and really present.
Hmm.
So so not much later, I was thinking about linear and nonlinear, and I thought, oh, but this is a linear system, and I am a nonlinear thinker. That's why we're constantly in battle with each other. Now that I've embraced my nonlinear weirdness, I became very linear. How interesting is that, Sam? So I was always fighting the linear system, and now that I understand how nonlinear I am, I'm okay with the linear system. Not always, but generally speaking.
Yeah, yeah. And
And I
as
and I use it even myself now. What the
sure.
hell?
Well,
Right?
here's how I see that, and I think that you may too. The observer, right? The
Yep.
observer is the nonlinear thinker, and so when you're able to observe, then you can choose where to become linear, and that makes a huge difference. I had a really similar thing. I mentioned the aerospace company. Maybe it was a country. And at 26, then at 29, my life did the same thing. At 30, um, divorced. I had 4 kids, divorced. She took the kids back to Indiana. I was left here in Phoenix by myself. Excruciatingly depressing for a short time. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. I have an opportunity here now to get back in touch with me. And I went from 65 grand, this was 1988. I went from 65 grand a year to less than 6. And total change, nearly homeless, but not quite, because the universe was looking out for me, made sure I wasn't. Right. And I just had to pay attention as to who was saying, hey, I'm looking for a roommate. Do you know of anybody? And I said, no, you're not. Right. And it's what? Yeah, I'll be there.
I'm here. Yeah.
Yeah. So, magical things happen when you let yourself receive them and don't get in the way.
But now I have a very interesting question, I think. aren't we just doing our midlife crisis? Aren't we just two old farts now on Zoom talking about our midlife crisis? And like, oh, look at these poor bastards, losers. You know, they lost everything, and oh my God, they saw it all, and now they're changing the world. It sounds a bit sad when I'm the observer now,
Well,
right? How
yeah,
do you
yeah,
see?
of course, because we want to just poke, poke the bear, so to speak, and have fun with it and realize, oh yeah, well, because we're not in that situation anymore. We've gone through that trauma and found triumph in it, and it's taken time, right? I don't know that it was such a midlife. When I had my spiritual awakening at 18, I asked the question, prayed, hit my knees, and actually prayed to know what truth was and was willing to die for it if necessary. Following week, 11/11/1975, I did. I was asked in meditation if I was willing to die for what I believed in. What did I believe in at that time? I started with Christ consciousness, felt a little empty, let go of it. Cosmic consciousness, I felt full. And so I said yes. And then shortly later, I popped out of my body and ended up in light, beyond it, and given my marching orders. And then came back. So from that, I understood we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware. Now, over time, that developed into this just internal passion that would never leave me, as far as wanting to be better, do more toward that goal. Right? The goal was harmony among people and planet, of which we're involved with now. Now, my point was going to be that the psychiatrist that my parents sent me to, I was 18, what a rite of passage, he listened to me for a few visits and said, you're not crazy. You've gone through a spiritual awakening. Why so young? I don't understand, but you've got all the signs of it. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he said, most people don't go through it till their mid 40s, if they ever do. And so that stuck with me. So in my mid 40s, I was looking around saying, okay, I'm in there. What's going on here? Oh,
What will happen now?
empty nesters, right? This is where the kids have grown up. They've left the home. The parents are going, okay, what's next? Right? Or they're in a midlife crisis of the career. Oh, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and I'm just not getting it anymore. It doesn't
Is
feel
this it?
fulfilling.
Oh my God, I was so looking forward to this. And this is it.
Right.
Yeah, that's an awakening as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have them, and I like to say, well, suffering is optional, of which the Buddha said. It's the suffering means the dwelling in it, right? Rather than just
I agree.
recognize,
Yeah.
oh, this is happening. Okay, cool. I'm in transition. Now what?
Yeah. There's suffering and there's hardship. And those are two different things.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. There is no suffering. I love that when a Buddhist monk, is saying that
You just want to slap him, right?
in his outfit in India and with everything in balance. There is no suffering. And I find that fascinating, and I'm listening to those kind of people saying that, and I'm thinking, you're actually right. Maybe, probably, I think so. How beautiful! But what a nice debate. So, people, when you're listening, if someone is listening to us, when you're at a birthday party and it's very boring, then just say there is no suffering and see what happens. It's always a good debate, right? It's very interesting how people will respond to that, and some people get furious when you say that. Some people agree. Very nonlinear responses to
And it's all choice.
yeah.
It's all a simple, or maybe complex, choice. It's really a simple one that reverberates or ripples through the rest of our lives in various ways. And, we have evidence of it by looking around and seeing how many times we've had to go through the crashing and burning and rising again, like the phoenix, in order to get where we're at. And sometimes that's necessary, right? It's the willingness, it's the being like you, being vulnerable to it, right? Being willing to step into that place. And in that place, what kind of questions did you ask to ascend from it?
I made a promise with myself. I can share that with you. I made a promise never, ever, ever to convince anyone anymore. And that happened just after, oh, it's very clear to me now. And then I said, I'm never going to convince anyone anymore, because it's not helping me at all. It always comes back. It always fires back at you.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I can passionately talk about the Octopus Movement and how I see how we can connect a billion nonlinear thinkers together, and how we do global projects and create this into a better place and take care of each other. That's not convincing. That's just sharing what I'm doing and what I believe in. Now, I don't want to convince anyone you need to become a member, or you need to become a founding member, or you need to become an ambassador or whatnot. But I used to be there. I was an entrepreneur. I was very good in sales. And in my old definition of sales, it means convincing people. Now, my definition of sales means that you're able to share your passion with someone.
Mm-hmm. Transfer enthusiasm.
Right? I have that in the Octopus Movement. People come to me and they're like, well, I'm setting up my new company, and I find it so difficult because I hate sales. And they're like, but sales is, you hate sales in the old definition. But if I can share with you what sales really is, then you will love it, because it's just creating a space where you can talk about your passion. And that's what I'm doing here as well. This is not sales. I'm sharing my passion. I share about my awakening. I share about what I think, what multi-potentiality is, what the Octopus Movement is. If that's your passion, it's easy to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So don't convince anyone. My mantra in life: there is no suffering, and don't convince anyone.
Two very good points. And
Right.
and the convincing is really, if you feel like you have to convince someone, perhaps you are not convinced yourself, because usually what comes out of your mouth is what you need to hear.
Yes.
If and when you're in that
Can you say
place.
that again, Zen? Because that's a very important one, right?
Yeah,
If say it again so I can
absolutely.
memorize that.
When you're attempting to convince another, you're usually attempting to truly convince yourself, because the words coming out of your mouth are what you need to hear, not what the other needs to hear.
Here. And so we need to make a lot of mistakes in life,
Absolutely.
because then we can hear what we don't want to hear, and that will really teaches us something.
That's being your best friend.
Right? It's a nice one.
Isn't it?
I like that. Yeah.
Tough one. I call all of this stuff excruciatingly fun.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's that initial ooh, and then like, wow, right? Because it makes so much sense. The ooh is because your belief system is being confronted in that moment. And it could be with an example, with a question, or whatever, but something that you were used to thinking or believing is suddenly brought to your attention to question. And oftentimes, do you find this when you early on, not necessarily when you were trying to convince people, that just the questions that you would ask people, did you find that there was receptivity to the questions, or did they seem that folks felt it was an aggressive action, and they would turn on you feeling like they needed to be defensive rather than simply ask the
Well,
question
or later,
or answer the
right?
question?
That they would go with your energy, and okay, maybe he's right, or yeah, I should do this, and but always had a conversation with themselves. I don't really want to do this. So as soon as something goes wrong, then it's immediately, you see,
Right, right.
it's and it's all wrong, and then they start fighting with you, and you're like, what did I do? And you didn't do anything wrong, but you convinced someone to follow you, and they were not following you at all. And then they blame it on you, and you're in a fight. So,
Right. Because you didn't
I'm not.
check for understanding in the communication that you were having with them to make sure that they were on the same page completely.
No, no.
One of the things my dad um, wise man, and I wish I had listened to a lot of his stuff younger that I didn't. But he said to me one day, you know, be careful what or who you point a finger at, because you've got three coming back at
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
You better have three solutions, three something, right, to offer in support of, rather than be detrimental to, because we can always tear stuff down. That's the easiest thing to do. The tougher thing is to look for the gems, look for the seeds within something that doesn't seem quite right and yet can grow to be right. Like our movements, right? The Octopus Movement, the Live and Not Live movement, Live and Not Live. You know, we've got this notion that, you know, a lot of organizations, a lot of older institutions even have a lot of rules, right? And there are some rules that need to be in place. We just got two. Don't be an aggressor and be a good human,
Yeah.
right? Then we can have discussion about what that means, which allows us to build trust relationships so that we're congruent in how we understand those things, and then learn how to work together in order to move beyond them to create the things like you're talking about, nonlinear fashions, where we can create things that actually change the world and do it effectively in the systems. Whereas with Live and Not Live, we're focused on the two things: the legal principle, which is the don't be an aggressor, and needing to address the laws and legislation globally that allow it. Now that's a 10, 15, maybe even generation, 20-year project. But until we do that, we're still following the old rules, and it allows others to aggress all kinds of different ways. Then the moral side of it is be a better human, right? Or be a good human, first of all. Well, what's that mean? I think we all have intrinsic notions of what that means, but until we actually have a conversation about it, we're still guessing. We're assuming what we think is what the other person's thinking. You know, another mentor, he was president of the Association for Alternate Dispute Resolution in America, lawyer, and wonderful man. Says that, you know, there really is no conflict. There's only miscommunication.
Yep.
And by that, he meant that we show up, let's just use two as an example, show up to a negotiation table. Each person has their own dictionary that they speak and listen from. And until they understand the other person's dictionary, there's not going to be any true communication. So the first thing to do is unpack the dictionaries. And that takes time. Well, people want enlightenment, right? They want to go through the drive-through and get whatever they need.
Yeah.
Fast and furious, right?
Fast and furious indeed.
And
Instant satisfaction immediately. Go.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've been programmed like that, especially the younger generation now with all the fast foods. It just ripples through society. Well, we got to slow down in order to move fast.
Yeah.
And it's okay to slow down. Matter of fact, life becomes much more enjoyable when you do, because you can savor the moment. You can stop and smell the roses, right? And those phrases, all this, it's ancient wisdom, right? I'm sure you've found this. What are the kinds of things where you've found that this is actually ancient wisdom that's come back to for reformation or to reinstallation, if you will?
So many different areas. It's the moment where I said everything is crystal clear, is then when you read books or articles, then you connect everything to what you just have learned. So when you see Lord Shiva, for instance, and then, oh my God, he's nonlinear, and he's half man, half woman, and he's the god of dance, and he connects everyone together, and he's the god of the weirdos, basically. And I'm reading that and I'm thinking, oh, he's very nonlinear. And
Right.
someone in India pointed out to me, someone who's a founding member of the Octopus Movement, Rashmi, said to me, oh, you're like Lord Shiva, you know, you need to read that. So, but simple
If
little
you were
things.
to say that to the wrong crowd of people, they would say, oh, you egotistical megalomaniac,
True. Yeah.
right? And that's the
Yeah.
view that a lot of people have. It's like, that we have reference
But
in,
that's why it's so beautiful to be in a movement. That's why it's so beautiful to have a mycelium. I'm not talking about a community. I rather talk about the mycelium network of beautiful people, of atypical thinkers that are connected with each other, because there is a global understanding what the hell we're talking about. And when I say, that resonates to me, that Lord Shiva dude, that they're not saying immediately, oh my God, Perry, you huge ego, you narcissist fool.
right?
They're like, oh, but that's interesting. So I think that's why it's so important to create a global movement, because then we can change something, because we can look at the same thing in different angles and look at different things in one angle, and combine everything with each other without immediately pointing fingers to each other.
Sure,
That's ridiculous. And for
sure.
me, that's the linear way. If you behave that way, then it's wrong. Wait a second. Is that really true? Is that really the case? Look at all the grand masters in the universe and in history, and look at Andy Warhol. So cool. I've read the diaries of Andy Warhol. He was very non-linear. He was what I said in the beginning, that I was on both sides. I was weird and I wanted to be accepted. Well, he had the same struggle until the last day. He wanted just to be accepted by the crowd, by the people around him, by successful people. And my God, he was so successful himself that he couldn't even see it. He created the brand Andy Warhol, and everybody wanted to be affiliated with the brand Andy Warhol.
Right.
And in the end, one of the last paintings he made, it was about his thinking, and it was about a weird mind. I'm never being accepted. But he was. He just couldn't
Absolutely.
see it
Huge
because
following.
he was thinking in a different way.
Right.
What a beautiful, interesting contradiction. And if Andy Warhol was able to have more people like him in a global network, internet wasn't there yet, right? Thank God we have internet. Thank God we can Zoom.
Oh, yeah. And
Zen.
thank Covey for allowing all of this to just explode because of people who finally, through the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration, went inside and began examining themselves and looking for a different way.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, internet. Thank you, Zoom. Thank you,
Yeah.
COVID. Thank you,
Yeah.
all the cameras that they created in our laptops and
That's,
microphones and headset. I love it,
yeah.
and there is a biological connection even with us now. When I'm looking at a screen of my laptop, you're not here, but you're here, and
Mm,
I can hear you. That's why I'm wearing a headset. I really want to hear your voice very clearly, and the information is in ones and zeros in dark optic fiber cable through the ocean from Europe to the US in a cable, Zen. So we're
right.
traveling in a cable underneath the ocean, and still there is a biological connection right now happening between our brains. Fucking
That's,
miracle.
oh, absolutely. And that's how
Sorry
the,
for using
oh,
the F word, but I
yeah, whatever.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Andy
Oh, well.
Warhol, it would have been so cool to put Andy Warhol now in a chair and have Zoom in front of him, and maybe have for him a whole network all over the world with people like himself that he would
Mhm.
felt accepted, and still be the brand of Andy Warhol, and still be working with
Right.
the upper class of New York and whatnot, but that he could feel safe at some point as well.
And safety is an important thing. Also being comfortable with ambiguity and the unknown is another
Mhm.
thing that's important in this kind of lifestyle. You know, we're very similar with Live and Let Live. That um, I, I think I mentioned Jeffrey Mishlev earlier, and well-known um, parapsychologist here in America that has his own show on PBS for a number of years called Thinking Aloud. He now does stuff on YouTube, New Thinking Aloud. He's got 90,000 viewer or subscriptions, which isn't all that much in comparison, but his stuff is like really nonlinear. He talks to people all over the world about the
Really,
weird
yes,
stuff, right?
yeah,
Parapsychological things.
yeah.
And one of the things he said to me during our interview is there was a woman friend of his that talks to extraterrestrials, and she said that they see us as a bunch of alpha males at the top of pyramids competing with each other. And so that being the case, I also began to look at, okay, what's going to make the difference, especially with Live and Let Live? How do we differentiate? Well, there's all kinds of movements that are going on. There's organizations and things. They're all doing their specific stuff and they're doing it really well. And they're still all silos, right? Because they're not interconnected yet. So one of the things that we thought would be best was to begin that interconnectedness, which is one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because we're compatible. I saw that from the beginning. And that by doing so, then we can begin to share responsibilities and get involved in each other's movements and activities. You're the nonlinear. We're about dealing with the law and legislation eventually. And that's the toughest place to enter anything. That scares the bejeebers out of most people, right? And it's only going to
Yeah,
be a
I
select
choose
few.
the easy part, right?
Well, no, not at all, because
Yes.
you're still dealing with herding cats, right? Because that's the nature of people like you and I. We're all over the place, and we can shift immediately before people even realize we have, and we're talking about something else, and they're trying to follow us, right? Or understand us.
Right,
And sometimes
right,
neither happens.
right. Do you still follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, sometimes you just acknowledge what is true between us and in reality, if this is just the way it is. And when we speak truth, it resonates, like you were talking earlier, right? When you say the things that are just true, paradox has a lot of, or truth has a lot of paradox in it. However, the things that are ultimately true for us, we feel them when somebody speaks it. We don't know why or how.
It resonates with us, right?
Yeah.
We can feel it in our gut feeling, which is our brain as well. We know that someone is telling the truth. We know when it's compatible. We know when it's our language. We know when it's the place to be. When we see something, when we hear something, or when we read something, like this resonates with me. I need to be there. Sometimes even without understanding why. They
Well, it may
just know
take
the truth.
years for that understanding of why to unpack itself.
Yeah. So do you believe, so the why is now a little bit of a trend, right? Everything starts with the why. You need to know the why. Um,
And
I
there's
think,
another book called How.
yeah. How do we go to the, because I think you only know the why when you truly found the why. So it's, people are saying you need to find the why, but you can't find the why. You
Can't find it. It's in you.
you bump into the why, and then all of a sudden everything connects together. You're doing all kinds of shit in your life, and then all of a sudden it's there, and then you're, oh, that's the why. And it's not, and I go back to the linear education again. You follow the questionnaire, and then you answer all the questions, and then at the bottom, that's your why. Hell no. Or you cannot decide, I'm setting up a company right now, and we're building a business plan, and we're writing down the why because it's already crystal clear, and there isn't a company yet. I don't believe that. You can write it down that you think that's your why for now, but your true why is always in retrospective, I think, because they always have the example of the why of our Apple dude. What's his name again?
Steve Jobs.
Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so clear the why for Steve Jobs and etc. Unfortunately, he's no longer around us, but I would have loved to have a very honest conversation about that with him. If
Mhm.
if there truly was a clear why in the beginning, I don't think so.
I don't know that there was. There was a differentiation that I think was there. One of my other guests, Alex Moses, actually met Steve prior to iTunes.
Oh,
And
really?
he actually suggested to Steve that he needs subscriptions. And it was one of those moments where there was an aha moment in Steve's eyes, and shortly thereafter they introduced Apple iTunes, right? And just to be in that place where one sentence directly spoken changed the course with just a question or an offering of, hey, why don't you have
But
this?
then there isn't a clear why, because then he would never ever, change his course or have something added to it. And of course you can create the big picture, of
Mhm.
course. But I find that fascinating,
I
that
think there's an
that you can,
intrinsic why of I want to feel fulfilled.
and I want to make something beautiful that really works well. And of course, but yeah, I can't explain myself very clearly here. I'm rambling a little bit, but
I'm not
it's
so sure. I mean, I think I get what you're saying. Let me reflect on that in the process of the formation, it's like we have our attention, intention, and interaction that is unified towards something. We have an idea that we want to manifest, such as in the case of starting a company, right? You have a solution for a problem that you think will work. And then over time, you don't understand the why in that. You just see a problem and solution,
yeah.
right? Because that's the linear thinking. And then as you go into it, then all of these other experiences start to unpack in the how that it takes place. And then that ultimately reveals the why, because you start questioning, okay, what's really in this for me? And not just from an egotistical or narcissistic standpoint, but how am I being fulfilled in this? What is the life fulfilling events that are happening here for my growth and
Mhm.
further connection with the world or my inner life, or both, right? Both are ideal, right? We live half inside and half
All of
out.
the above. I love that as an answer.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
of the above. Both. Always.
yeah, yeah. So I think, did that encapsulate kind of, did I unpack what you were trying to
Yep.
say?
Yep. You unpack that. Surely. Yes.
Cool.
Yay.
That's part of what I love about having conversations that are psychologically safe and intellectually humble, so that we can unpack these things. We can question what each other means. We don't feel this need for, oh, no, that isn't what I meant at all. I meant this, right? It's like, okay, we're sharing it and creating a way to learn how to understand each other and practicing the art of how we know that works.
And unfortunately, when I give a speech about neurodiversity and autism, for example, then a huge company tells me that they hire people with autism and very happy with them because they do have superpowers that are very cool for the company.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, the employees in the company itself are not that open-minded, and they're not looking at themselves, what is really happening here. And this is what I said in the article in Forbes. It's the unwritten rules, that the unwritten rules are there from the system, and then someone comes in the company who does things differently, isn't following all the unwritten rules. And what do we do instead of asking questions or making mistakes? Or they're immediately saying, this is not according to the unwritten rules. I can't work with you. Or, this doesn't work for me because I'm always been doing it this way. And I think your foundation, my foundation, and our movements are really going towards that. And it would be so beautiful if we would stop doing that, and that we just acknowledge that there are unwritten rules and that some people will follow them. Some people might have some difficulty in following them because their brains are wired differently,
Mm-hmm.
or they're raised differently, or whatever. And seek the potential and the opportunity there, like Steve Jobs did. And Steve Jobs as well, he was different for
Right.
sure. And I
Now,
remember
how do
I
we,
saw a journalist saying to Steve Jobs, "You're out of your mind. How do you?
thank you.
You're an idiot. How explain yourself?" And Steve Jobs, still very calm, and that interview or that fragment in the press release is hilarious now, of course, knowing what we know right now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we're
How do
all
you
brilliant
see,
people.
how, and they've had amazing, sometimes short-lived effects and careers and impactful lives on others. What I get the sense that is present is the notion of the inability to nurture self-expression, right? And what I mean by that is, how do you see that we can nurture the notion of being able to speak what's on your mind, heart, gut, without feeling like you're going to be disruptive with it, even though it may be disruptive, right? That there's this, how do we condition a new time or a new order or a new philosophy that embraces the ability of others who are diverse to simply be able to have a reciprocal conversation about learning about each other, self-expression from the experiencer or the participant, as well as the person that is maybe more linear in their thinking. How do you see that evolving?
Well, I think a lot of people are trapped in the expectations for themselves and from others. And for me, it goes wrong there when you're trying to fulfill the expectations, and you're in a battle with yourself or with others.
Mm-hmm. So it's an unspoken, unfulfilled expectation.
Yeah, how do you open up to others? If that's a battle you have with yourself, it's a bit like trauma. People can, when they haven't overcome their trauma, when they're stuck with the trauma, they can be very angry, and then you're thinking, why are they so angry with me, or why are they so aggressive? And they're
Yeah, it's not
basically
about you at
aggressive.
all.
No, it's it's about themselves. And I think the expectations have a part of that as well, that if you're struggling with your own expectations, and you're not very aware of what's really, really, truly is happening, then when someone disruptive comes into your life, and you're struggling with your own expectations, then that's a conflict, because that messes up everything. And you're trying to convince yourself, then the convincing is back. You're trying to convince yourself you're doing a good job, or you're getting where you want to go, or and if the expectations are gone, and you truly understand your own thinking and who you are and what you want to do, then I think someone cannot disrupt anything anymore, because you're safe anyway, right? because you're not convincing yourself, and someone comes in being totally different, and the only thing you do is, wow, that's interesting.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And being able to be in that place of, wow, that's interesting, then you can reflect and just observe the process and be able to talk about it from a place of observation rather than a place of defensiveness.
Yes.
And the other person has the opportunity to grow.
Yeah. And I think I have an understanding that nonlinear thinkers are a bit more curious than linear thinkers. And I think it also has to do with fear. When there is a lot of fear in your life and you're trying to control everything, your curiosity becomes a bit difficult. And when you're in a situation where you're more fearless, you can find it more easily to find yourself in a very curious state of mind.
Sure. And
I'm
the brain
afraid of
chemistry changes too. You have more endorphins and serotonin and all the kinds of things that give you the, right? Where the cortisol that's fired with the fear, causes you to condense. And, energetically, where do you want to be? You want to be closed up and not allow anything.
I call that tight underwear, Zen. Do you want to wear tight underwear, or
in your panties in a pinch, right?
Right? That it's fear.
I call it
tight.
butt puckering.
Say that again, please.
Butt puckering.
Butt puckering. That's new to me. Butt puckering.
That's one of the things that I've used. I mean, it's a little graphic, but because you clench, right? And when you're clenching,
I'm afraid of heights. When I'm in the mountains, I love being in the mountains. Yeah. It's very strange. I love climbing in the mountains, but I'm afraid of heights terribly. And when you're there in a specific spot for me in the mountains, then all of a sudden, bang, fear kicks in, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. It's okay. But I also noticed that that's not the moment in time when I'm creating new thoughts and new ideas for the Octopus Movement. That's not when I'm in a spot on the mountains where I become very nervous and with a lot of fear that I think I'm going to fall down and break my neck or whatever. But then 5 minutes later, I'm sitting somewhere in a beautiful spot under a tree and drinking some tea and eating something, and my kids are there, and it's all beautiful. You can smell the fresh air in Switzerland, and it's so beautiful. Then the ideas are flowing, and I need my notebook immediately, and I do this. That's simple, right?
Yeah, I can relate. I was a rock climber for about 15 years.
You were?
And
wow.
Yeah, it was, I had a blast. Never lead climbed, but the one time I did, this is how quickly thoughts manifest. I was 60 foot up on a rock face, clipping into the first anchor. And I had the carabiner with the extension for the rope to clip in, set up. I was pulling the rope up between my legs and getting ready to clip in. And I thought, I hope I don't slip. Well, guess what happened? On the S in slip, my right foot let go, and now I'm going down the side of the rock face, and my climbing shoes sounded like a card in a bicycle tire, right? Just all the way down. I get about 10 foot off the ground, and I push off, turn around, and land, and I knock my buddy, the belayer, over, and I tumble, and he tumbles. Neither one of us got hurt, thank God. And we laughed hysterically after that. But it was the last time that I ever tried to lead climb again. I just like that was it for me.
Don't slip. Here you go.
Yeah. But I mean, perfect example of how thoughts become things.
Yeah.
And how easily our minds produce them. Now, we're a little long on time, and I've loved this. It's been just really fulfilling for me, Perry. In our parting, as we come to a close, parting is such sweet sorrow. How do you?
You're weird, Sam.
Yeah, I know, and I love it. And you do too. What kind of advice would you give to those who have been listening that might be linear thinkers, or it might be nonlinear, that might help them explore the depths of who they are in that regard a little more.
Discover your brain. Please discover your thinking. Try to discover how do you think, how do you make decisions, how do you learn, and don't go in that normal pathway, like, oh, this is how I operate, done. Try to figure out if you have autism, if you have ADHD. Go there, go and do tests, go and figure things out. Why, what am I doing, and what is happening? Because when you discover new things, make mistakes. Maybe that's the biggest advice. Make mistakes. So try to discover your brain and make mistakes, and look up things. And is it something else? Because when you discover new ideas or new labels or new thoughts about how you think and how you operate, that's, I think, always the first step to become more fearless and more curious. And then you can also stop convincing yourself you need to be somewhere where you're not, because then you can allow yourself to be who you are. And that's beautiful, and everybody loves that if you do that, and you become a very, very pleasant person, and everybody loves you, and everybody wants to be with you, and it makes life interesting.
Absolutely does. And in essence, consciousness is fearless.
Yes.
Right? It's just energy, unqualified energy. What we do with it is our choice.
Exactly. Thank you, Zen, for
Oh,
this
thank you, Perry.
conversation. That was fun.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to have more, I'm sure.
I'm going to interview you as well, Zen, and we will organize that.
Look forward to that. So anybody listening, be ready. We're going to go off in yet deeper and more profound ways, maybe. I don't know.
We're going to
we'll switch roles and see what happens.
Switch roles, and I will deep dive into the real Zen. No, let's see what happens. I'm curious.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Thank you so much.
Until then, namaste and in la catch. Thank you again for sticking with us through this episode of One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host, and I will see you next time.